Barry White wanted to get it on, but today we're looking at Humanities uncovering the past and some dating techniques. You just got rickrolled by your teacher as if you want to take dating advice from me or a history textbook.
Nope. Ain't nobody got time for that. Nope.
Definitely not. What our textbook is good for, though, is telling us how we